Hello everyone and welcome to this month's iTWO costX Coffee Break webinar. We are following on with our industry trade series that we've been doing over the last couple of months really, and this month we'll be looking specifically at how this now ties into our workbooks. My name is Herman and I'm a consultant with iTWO costX. For those of you who are new to costX and are not sure yet what it is all about, welcome first of all. iTWO costX is a fully integrated estimating solution, and depending on your requirement, we obviously have different features available. So it might be driven by your estimating requirements or driven by maybe the size of your business and what you need or what your budget allows. costX comprises everything. This is the full costX, everything from measurement, how that on-screen takeoff, how that measurement then ties into your workbooks or your estimating or bill of estimates or bill of quantities, and then on top of that there's auto revisioning functionality, a report writer, and obviously the collaboration that comes within a team, which is sometimes lost when using other softwares. In terms of compatibility and the support and what we can integrate with, if we start off on the left hand side, we can support more than 20 different file types, so anything from JPEGs and PDF drawings all the way to DWG, DWFX, 3D BIM models, IFC, SketchUp models. This is then used within the costX environment where we take off and estimate. Within the environment, there's a sort of a database setup. We also hold rate libraries, phraseologies, and all sorts of tools that will help you compile the most complete estimate. And then there's the export functionality or even integrating via our API with other solutions, maybe for procurement reasons or programming reasons. You then have that open API that you can connect to your other full spectrum of softwares. Now, over the last few months, we've covered specific trades. We started off with infrastructure, then we moved on to carpentry, we did MEP, and also covered some groundworks. And during these 4 sessions, we actually covered most of the dimension group or takeoff topics that there is to cover. We covered specific topics with regards to these trades, like cut and fill, the specific drawing layouts that you might get in an MEP drawing, the floor and walls and the complexities of that in a carpentry trade, with the roads, bridges and rails in the infrastructure. But with covering all of these dimension functions, a lot of those are obviously duplicated across different trades. So if I show you how to measure an area or a length or a count item, whether you do that for an infrastructure project or whether you do that for a carpentry project, it's the same thing. So we covered all of the functions really that you can think of within the dimension side, including variables that you can use when measuring, including custom quantities, different formula that you can use. The rebar function is covered in the carpentry webinar. How to do unit conversions, the auto count function, how to copy and paste dimensions, do dimension cutouts and negative dimensions, and also then how to create live links to your workbooks. So if you want to view any of these previous webinars, please go to our website. It's www.ribinternational with a /webinars, and you can find all of them listed over there. Because today we are focusing specifically on the workbooks, and first I'll show you how to add a workbook. Even though we have worked with workbooks already, there's some different ways to add a workbook, whether that is from those specific dimension groups. You can import them from an Excel file, or you can use previously created templates, or you can literally start afresh and create a blank workbook. Then we'll cover some of the workbook tools like the reference report, find and replace functionality, as well as secondary quantities. And finally, we'll utilize some functions and formula in the workbook as well. So without further ado, let's get straight into costX. So here we are in costX, and other than the previous weeks, we are now in the workbook view where we have all of our workbooks listed, and you'll see I've got a workbook that's already been filled out. So I'll keep this aside for a little while I show you how to actually add workbooks of your own. Now, the first option, when I look at the drop-down function, you'll see at the bottom, I still have those same dimension groups that we set up in previous weeks or in the previous few weeks, in the previous webinars. We've showed you how to create these and use these for different trades. Now today what I want to focus on is generating workbooks, and the first thing that I want you to consider, and why I also said that your dimension groups could preempt what we are doing today, is the fact that you can actually use this dimension group folder structure to generate a summary page in your workbooks. So the way that we do that, and this is the first option that I'm looking at today in adding a workbook, is to generate a workbook from dimension groups. Now this has previously been explained in a webinar, so you can refer to that one as well, and it drills into all of the details. I'll just do a brief overview of it. So we'll call this the dim groups one. You'll see that you again can choose a default rate library if you have an existing rate library that's been coded up. So whichever one you want to use, you can select that one from your drop-down. And following that, you also include zones, which is again another topic altogether. And then at the bottom, if your rate library has proper descriptions and all of those codes match, you can choose whether you want your descriptions to come from your dimension groups or from your rate item. Based on that, or with all of those options, then we click OK, and that then generates a new workbook for us. And you'll see that this workbook structure on the first level resembles our dimension group folder structure, like I've just said. And then all of the items that we've measured will be inside of our subtotal items. So now we just say that the rate library that I've chosen actually doesn't have rates for some of the items. So I'll just click OK to accept that. And then just show you in any of these items, then when I drill into the detail, it shows me the items that I've measured, and again it creates those live links for me for the quantities, which will take me back to the drawings. Now that's the first option. The second option is sometimes you may have a workbook or a BOQ or an estimate in Excel. We have an Excel import tool, which is the second option that we will look at today. Again, this actual option has been explored in much more detail in a different webinar as well. You can please refer to that if you want more details on this. There's basically three ways to import. The first one is based on the structure of the Excel, or you can base it on the formatting within the Excel, or then you can create a control column. So what all of those means, like I said, is explored in much more detail in its own webinar, but basically it brings you to this window that you then go ahead, you do all of your settings, you choose, in this case in the structure, each trade will be in its own tab in Excel. So here's the available tabs that I've chosen. I have not used the control column in this case. The description is in column B. I can choose what I want to do with blank rows. I can concatenate items if they maybe stretch across different rows. And then I can also define how I want my new workbook to be set up, so across the levels. And then here, if I've got certain formattings that I want to use for those levels, this is where I would use that. So in this case, for level 1, I'll use the tabs. But then if there was the formatting, this is where I would change it. And then if I go to my preview, it matches the column, and then I just need to map the other columns. So this is my quantity column, this is my unit of measurement, and this is my rates. Personally, I don't do the totals. I use that as a double check, so to confirm that it has actually imported it correctly, so that you can do that integrity test. So then I just click the import button. This is just the Excel one, and you'll see how it then brings in those items for you as well. And then the last option that we are looking at today is just to add a blank workbook. This workbook, as I suggest, is just a blank one. I'll show you now. It's not only a blank option that I'm looking at, but let's just call this a blank. Again, you can choose a rate library that you want to use and the zones that you want to use. But then when you add a blank one, you'll see here at the bottom, you also have a based on section. Now, this based on section is a topic that I've mentioned multiple times in the past, but basically anything you do within costX creates a template for future projects. So in this case, with a workbook specific, if there's a specific workbook in one of my previous jobs that I know I want to use for this project, I can then go and choose that workbook and create a sort of a copy of it, or use it as a template. So zero out the quantities, but use the the descriptions of that, or the layout of that workbook for this workbook. In this case, I'll just use a blank one. And then I'll also quickly explain how we can then populate this workbook. Now, the first option is I can literally just type in whatever it is I want to do and keep populating it from memory or from my mind. I can copy and paste from an Excel document. So if I have an Excel document that I struggle to import, I can still copy and paste that text, or from a Word document, or if it's a readable PDF, you can select those items and copy and paste that into the workbook. With the copy and paste, I've sometimes seen that it messes up some of your formatting, specifically with regards to your preferred font. So what you can actually do to change the font at the end of editing the whole workbook is to go into the workbook properties again by double clicking on that workbook, and then selecting your font from here. And after selecting that font here, it will update the font across your workbook. You can also set up your user columns in here. So if you want to update, if you maybe have labor, material, plant calculations, or any other type of calculations that you're doing, you can change your headings in the workbook properties. While I have that open, I just thought I would show that quickly. And then the last option, ceiling, substructure, etc. And then over here, further down, you might have your ceiling item, and going into the subtotal, where I then start adding my descriptions of items. I can also utilize the phraseologies, which in my instance to the Middle East specific, and which follows a similar trend to the UK guys, is I can use an NRM or a POMI maybe, which I have as a phraseology, which is essentially just a template or a library of template descriptions. So I can then drop down. I can even use these as headings on the first level as well. But if I then get down to my ceilings, and I can then add these items from here, and go down, choose the descriptions that I want, choose the headers that I want, and can even combine them and pull that across as items and quantify them. You can edit the description. Again, it is editable, but it also gives you your unit of measurement, and then you can just link up your rate from a rate library or from a previous project or your head. And that then is essentially what we do with a blank workbook. Now going to our workbook that we had at the beginning, which has been pre-populated for us. We're just having a look at this and having a look at some of the tools that we have with regards to editing and reviewing these workbooks. The first button, or the first tool that we'll look at, is called the reference report, and you'll find that in your workbooks ribbon towards the right. Well, let me move from the left, rather from the formatting. So formatting the workbook, like I've already mentioned, can happen over here, or you can also do it in your properties, your workbook properties. Then over here, you have very similar things to what you might be familiar with in Excel already, rows and columns, cut and paste, etc. One thing that I always tell users as well is the copy and paste values that you might be familiar with in Excel is slightly different in costX. So we don't copy, and then with the paste, you have the different paste options. Our different options is actually when you copy. So if you want to copy the values only, that's where you would select this rather than in Excel where you paste and then paste values as a special paste option. So just note that. And then getting to the review part over here, the first one is the reference report that I would like to show you now. If I just click on that reference report, it runs the reference report, checking everything in this workbook. And there's 4 sort of headings that it checks. Now, the first one is it checks if there's any dimension groups that have not been linked to an item in the workbook. So over here we can see there's 2 of them that has not been used yet, the kitchen splashbacks as well as the bathtub under the plumbing. The second one is showing me where the dimension groups that have actually been used, where they have been used. Now this looks slightly foreign in terms of what it's telling me, but it's actually quite easy to figure out what it says. So the first item is a row reference. So over here I can count down to row 19. So my lifts has been linked to the vertical and horizontal transportation. So to get into the cost sheet, I go in here, and then C2 is the cell reference where it has been linked. So this has been linked into the cost sheet specifically, but then I can also see if an item has been linked into the quantity sheet. And then you'll see the first reference with regards to the row reference is the level 1 is 13, and then level 2 will be in row 4. Okay, so to show you 2 examples, there's D4 and C2. So let me go into those lifts and then 13.4 D4 into the quantity sheet. Okay, so the first one is 19. I'll go into 19, and I see there that's just a straight link into cell C2. And then the 13.4 is for ceilings, 13, 1, 2, 3, row 4, and this was into the quantity sheet. And then D4, so there's that living and kitchen, there's that item linked. Okay, so it's quite easy to then go and find those items within the reference report and see where they have been linked. And obviously then if an item has been linked to multiple items, it has all of the references in there. And when I move to the bottom of the report, I can see any unknown formulas. So if there's a formula that's not making sense, so essentially would return an error in an error, or then if there's any items that still has a 0 attached to it, that also displays here at the bottom with a similar reference or a similar way to reference them and to find them. So now how to go about to fix some of these items, and again we'll utilize the tools that we've seen here at the top. So the first item that we want to fix is, let's say, the bathtub item. So I don't know if you saw, but on the reference report there was a bathtub at the top that was not used from the dimension groups, and there was actually a bathtub that was utilized, but there was an unknown formula. And it was because in the dimension group we used bathtub as 2 words. However, in this formula we used it as a single word. So it might be that it was, you know, a template item or an item that was copied across, and there was just somehow someone got it mixed up. If you drag and drop it, that obviously won't happen. But now to go and find it, so what we can, the find and replace option is here at the top with the binoculars. We can search for something with the advanced options to search as well. Or then if I go straight to the replace, I'll look for bathtub with a single word, and I'll replace it with the bathtub that matches the dimension group name, which is the 2 words. And then I'll need to ask it to look across the whole workbook and not just in the sheet. And then I can tell it to find the next instance of it, and as I go through it I just accept and replace them. Now again, I can do replace all, or I can replace them individually. So I'll just go ahead and replace until it doesn't find any more of them. and there I've found all of those instances. So I can click OK, and I can close out of my find and replace functionality. Then the next item is that splashbacks that I want to measure. So I think that was in, yeah, let me do it over here. I've got this wall tiling item already, which is the same tile that I want to use for my splashbacks. So what I can do again is I can actually copy this whole row, which will copy, you know, the quantities, etc. So you'll see for all of our functions, if there's a shortcut available, it will obviously be displayed on the right hand side. So I can copy that row, and then I can choose to paste that row right here as well. It pastes it above, so I should have actually gone down, but that's fine. It is what it is. Now here I've got a quantity build-up. In this case, I'll actually just delete it, and what it does is it deletes the whole build-up. So it actually deletes all the information below there. The rate I'll leave for now and show you how I'll make that adjustment in a second. And then the description for this item, I'll just change that to width not exceeding 300 mils. And that will then change it to a item that's a linear meter. And then I need to go and find that dimension group and drag and drop that across to get my meter. It is a length, so I just click update and it puts that in there. And then for the rate, there's a rate build up in here as well, and this rate is for the 300 mil thick, or let's call it a 300 mil thick, so just make it 0.3 instead of 1, and I will then update my rate accordingly as well. Okay, so that sorts out those two items that we haven't measured. Then some of the zero items, we're referring to the zeros that we have here at the bottom. You'll see this zero actually does have a build-up already, but there's no rate for the percentages. So what I'll do is another very neat function that's really useful to use within workbooks to help you to navigate through the workbooks is to actually use what we call named cells. Now, how those work is you'll see most or all of the cells obviously have a reference at the top for, you know, similar to Excel, where you have your column and your row reference. Okay. Now, what we can do is add a name to a cell to help us to find it easier. So in this case, we'll use the suggested name, which is the element subtotal. We'll click OK, and we'll see that that changes the name of it. Now, the benefit of having this is we can then use it in functions. So if I then go in here and in the right column, I add a function to get the named cell, and I can then refer to other workbooks. So if I have multiple workbooks and I want to reference another workbook, I can refer to that other workbook. Or if I leave it blank, it refers to the workbook where it is in. So in this case, I leave it blank, and then if I copy the workbook in the future, it won't come back to this workbook. It will actually look for it within the workbook that it is. And then in here, I only have the one, so I'll use that. But then I can click update, and I can see that it actually brings in that rate with that live link, so it can take me back to where that cell is saved, or where that cell is, which is obviously useful. And then again, just the shortcut to duplicate that function down, I use the shortcut of Control and D. Now, another useful tool or another useful feature of using these named cells is I can refer to it in my workbook values. So all of my named cells can be used through here, and it's actually, so if I just go anywhere in my workbook, I can quickly reference and go straight to that cell by right-clicking and saying show that named cell, which is obviously just useful for navigation and to see where certain items are coming from. So I can find it in my workbook values. And then if I come back into my reference report and run that reference report again, I'll now see how my unused dimension groups are now gone, meaning that all of them have obviously been used. And when I go down, I'll see that some of my items at the bottom, unknown formulas, there's actually still one, that is not finding, but then also the zeros have all been cleared out and handled at the top. So I need to go and fix this still, which I'm not going to bother with right now. For the sake of this exercise, that I think is sufficient. Now, two of our other tools that I still want to show you as well is within our interior doors. I'll use an example. It's called the secondary quantities. So what this tool does is it can actually show you a secondary quantity as opposed to the quantity that you've measured. So in this case, in the painting, as an example, I've displayed the square meters of what I've painted, but maybe I want to display or show how many doors it actually is that I have painted. So to do that, what I will do is I will go in or select that quantity, and I can then go to access this secondary quantity. We double click into the quantity, and you'll see there's a new ribbon that appears at the top called secondary quantities, and in here we can then choose which quantity we want to use as the secondary quantity. So let's choose the count option, which is the number that we're looking for. However, you'll see that this count will now return the full total of that count column, which in this case is incorrect because we've used the same doors twice to calculate the faces and the edges. So we can exclude certain rows from that calculation by selecting them, choosing the exclude rows, and that will then update it and show us the correct quantity. And then lastly for today, to wrap today up, we'll go back to our workbooks ribbon again. And the last feature is, you'll see on my example, I've got the GFA displayed. So all of my subtotals are dividing by the GFA to give me a rate per square meter of GFA. But let's say for my floor finishes, for example, I don't actually want my GFA. I want the applied floor finishes quantity. So let's delete that and use another function that is actually going to go and fetch the sum of the quantity that is below. So what the function that we choose is the xSum total quantity, and we click insert, and that then brings in the quantity of all the items in the level below. However, this looks very strange because we can't have an applied floor finish that's greater than our GFA. That obviously doesn't make sense. So how this works is it's actually summing up the totals of the quantity column, and in this case it's disregarding the unit of measurement. So there's obviously some ceramic, in this case ceramic skirtings that's been measured, some wood skirtings at the bottom, as well as some accessories that's been measured in meters. So we need to exclude these quantities from the calculation, and the way that we do that is with this tool at the top that says exclude quantities. So you just select the quantities that you want to exclude. In turn, as you exclude them, you'll see they go away from being colored in yellow, and then also reduce the quantity at the top. So you can also multi-select, exclude those quantities, and see our revised quantity. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your continued support. We always love to hear from you guys as well, so connect with us on LinkedIn, or please drop us an email if you need any assistance.